Good evening, welcome to this evening's edition of Tiski Sal. My name's Aaron Bastani. Amidst the recriminations and analyses, which are probably a little bit more informed by fact, given that a few days have passed since the general election last week, I'm joined by Paul Mason as we discuss what happened. Paul, of course, was a prominent supporter of a second referendum on EU membership, and according to some, it was, of course, that position that cost Labour, if not a majority, several dozen seats. Paul, if you follow his Twitter feed, disagrees with that analysis. It's great to have you, Paul.
It's great to be here.
People who aren't familiar with Paul, you surprise me, but if you aren't, he's a writer, broadcaster, journalist. Most recent book is Clear, Bright Future. It touches on many of the issues, I think. If anything, this election's made them even more salient about identity, the breakdown of neoliberalism and what comes next, both from the left and the right. So I guess I'll start with a really simple question. Did the commitment to a people's vote cost Labour dozens of seats?
Well, Labour only ever committed to a second referendum. They never used the words people's vote. But I think what happened was that the amount of time it took them to commit to anything caused a really significant drop in Labour's support. If you remember, the Labour NEC was invited to indeed support, remember, and for those who haven't been following it, maybe people abroad, the idea was that since the Tory plan for Brexit was going to shit and it was falling apart, we had to do something. And Labour's NEC, its national executive, was offered the chance to say, whatever deal comes out, we'll have a referendum on it, because all the deals that were being offered by the Conservatives are anti-working class, implicitly racist, anti-worker, anti-environment programs, and we can't vote for them, so we can't say, yeah, okay, people voted for this 2 years ago, so off you go through Parliament. We need a way of legitimately stopping it. You can't just stop it in Parliament. You have to stop it by reversing the referendum result. So that was the argument for a second referendum. Now.
And when was that? When was the NEC meeting?
The NEC meeting was at the end of April. I think it was the 28th of April. And it said, classically, and this is one of the problems I hope we'll discuss, the Corbyn machine moved in. I understand that Jeremy himself was even thinking about voting for it, but was dissuaded. So the Corbyn machine moves in. All 9 left-wing representatives from the local Labour parties vote against this motion. It falls. It's the end. If you look at the opinion polls at this point, Labour's sliding a bit because people can see that it's not quite sure what it's going to do about the Brexit crisis. From that moment, when we were on 33, 6 weeks later, we're on 22 points. We're on 22%. So we have lost, call it margin of error, we lost a third of our support in Parliament, in the electorate, in 6 weeks. Who got it? It's really clear. If you look at the poll of polls averages are that the Lib Dems got it all. And from mid-June, the Lib Dems were neck and neck with Labour. Now, bad though this result is, because we fought back to finish the story, at the September Labour conference, we committed to a second referendum on any deal, and that, I would argue, formed the platform for Labour fighting back from where it was in the mid-20s up to where it got, which is 32%. So for me, it is not at all the second referendum that lost it. Of course, the Brexit position was rejected by the electorate, and we have to accept that. Even though something like 52% of voters voted for progressive parties, formerly anti-Brexit parties, it's true that the right and the far right were able to mobilise a social coalition that now dominates the British Parliament, will enact Brexit. And so I hope we'll go on to talk about what we do next, but it is clear to me that if we had a clear position, one way or the other, on both the second referendum and Brexit, which we didn't have, we could have then set about saying, well, one part of our alliance is going to be really pissed off by this, so let's do something. And it was the absence of ever having a position right through from April through till September that, for me, what does it also do? Corbyn's ratings had gone from -10 to -30 in 2018. In 2019, they went from -30 to -50 and never came back. And on the doorstep, I don't know about you and what the viewers' experience was, but on the doorstep, the issue number one was Jeremy, And it's a mixture of this reactionary critique of him, which I think is implicitly racist, that says Jeremy cares about brown people and foreign people more than he cares about me. But it was also the guy's incompetent and can't work out what he stands for. And if you're standing as a technocrat, you can get away with that. But if you're standing as a conviction politician, that's a really tough thing to hear on the doorstep. But I'm willing to listen actually to evidence. You know, I think we should all assess the evidence. But if things had gone my way in April and we committed to a second referendum and generally a kind of resistance to Brexit position, what would I have then spent the summer doing? Campaigning in all the places we lost. Because then it was going to be really tough in those places.
Okay, I think, it's important to highlight that I think in the weeks prior to the general election, Labour was polling behind the Lib Dems amongst Remainers and behind the Brexit Party amongst Leave voters.
Yeah.
The situation was dire.
It was four-party politics.
Yeah.
The lines on the graph are almost parallel. They're almost everybody's on about 20-something percent.
Yeah. It was a remarkable moment, and obviously that caused major problems for Labour. And I get that. And clearly the electorate polarised around the issue of Brexit because of the European elections, which in the defence of the leader's office and defence of Labour, nobody realised that was actually going to happen until about February, March.
Yeah.
Well, until March really, because then of course we're not going to leave and we're not going to meet the Article 50 deadline. But the counter argument then is actually, because I agree with you, Jeremy Corbyn's ratings recovered significantly in 2017 to the extent that his personal approval ratings. I'm not a fan of personal ratings because I think a better measure is who do you prefer as Prime Minister, because that means something. Approval rating is quite abstract, but let's stick with that. The week after the 2017 general election, I think he was on plus 17. It was just a completely remarkable turnaround, and then it went straight back down again. But there's an argument to be made, which is any adoption of a second referendum was always going to undermine his pedigree as a conviction politician, because what I found out in 2017, which you're right, disintegrated by this year, was you would talk to people who were anti-socialists, the exact same people you're talking about, Tories, but they would say, and it's a very sort of mercurial English thing, very eccentric thing, I don't agree with him, but he really stands up for it. And there's this kind of idea, there's this character type in English society of like a cantankerous old person who won't give up on their opinions, and that had some grudging respect and admiration from a certain subset of society, which by last week had gone.
It had, but let's add another layer in here. So I think it's worth forensically going through what I can remember of what we did. For me, after the referendum result, and even after the 2017 general election, I was pretty sure we had to deliver Brexit, because it had a democratic mandate. We'd lost that election as well as the referendum, and a soft Brexit wouldn't have been a disaster. However, by the Labour Party conference of 2018, where there was this surprise outpouring of pro-Remain stuff from both the left and the centre of Labour, that shocked me, and I thought, shit, we're actually going to lose loads of voters if we don't back something that is a fight against this Brexit. Now, at that moment, Theresa May had opened up the possibility of a fight, the Chequers deal, her soft Brexit, her entire cabinet fell apart, and it was. I sensed from mid-2018 that they were never going to get Brexit through that parliament, and that there was opportunity, which the progressive half of Britain wanted us to do, was to fight it. Now, whether they wanted to fight it in the form of a soft Brexit or Remain was open to question, but it was certainly true. So after that conference, when there was a standing ovation for Keir Starmer when he said, this is 2018, we'll have a second referendum, including Remain on the ballot paper. Okay, the second referendum was already there. People loved it within the party, and they were keen to fight for it. So my first response to that was, right, let's propose a really clear Labour Brexit. Norway plus, in the single market, in the customs union, freedom of movement, Norway plus. Nobody wanted to do that. Okay, so I spent the autumn, personally, spending the autumn arguing
you don't even think the leader's office wants to do that?
Well, they certainly didn't, because they were obsessed with what was now called the unicorn. They wanted, you'd speak to them and say, but we can't, they'd say, but we can't be in the single market, but we can't have freedom of movement. They always wanted to go for what we disparagingly called a unicorn.
So where did that come from? Because you're absolutely right. They never use the words Norway plus, which for me is, I would say, well, Labour's position is Norway plus, and people would say, well, they haven't said that, and I'd be like, well, you're kind of right.
I don't know where that came from. I think it was, we always ended up doing the right thing about 6 months too late. So in the end, what they came up with was quite close to Norway Plus. But it's so much easier to sell because it's this. You could say, we have a formula, we're out, nobody can say we haven't delivered Brexit, and yet we can defend workers' rights inside the single market. This, of course, was the Trade Union Congress position as well. They wanted to be inside the single market because only the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice is really, as we're now finding, the guarantee of being able to defend workers' rights during Brexit. So autumn 2018, I'm arguing for the second referendum with Labour to advocate a Norway-style deal. But then, of course, the Tory position began to fall apart. What we're going to see this week in the British Queen's speech and the withdrawal agreement bill is the hardest of all Brexit. But it began in December 2018 when Theresa May began to lose control. She lost votes. It was clear she was losing votes and could not get her Brexit through. And at that point, I just thought, right, this is not going to happen. The only two outcomes are possible here are a right-wing Tory government that does hard Brexit, or we stop Brexit.
When did you sort of...
December. I wrote an article saying, and I began to argue with people in the party that, look, there is no soft Brexit route anymore. Now, maybe my problem is I'm always 6 months ahead of what actually happens, and it's not a popular position to be in. I sensed that there was no space really for a soft Brexit. So I said, look, we've got to back Remain, we've got to back a second referendum. In that referendum, actually, throughout most of the time I was arguing for it, I was always prepared to put the Tory Brexit on the ballot paper. One of the problems we had as Labour is we ended up with with Labour Remain and Labour Brexit. I would rather have said Remain versus whatever Tory proposal is on the table at the time. Theresa May's in March 2019, Boris Johnson's in December 2019. So at this point, the argument starts at the top of Labour's top key, the decision makers, and it goes like this. The TSSA union, Hope Not Hate, and people like me were going and saying, look, and the European Parliamentary Labour Party were going and saying, we will lose about a third of our voters if we don't start backing the second referendum and fighting to stop Brexit.
Can I feed back on that quickly? Because I can foresee a situation where we get a lower, I shouldn't say it, Labour get a lower share of the vote than they did last week, but keep more seats. And I think there's definitely an argument that Labour, look, in 2000, it's different because, of course, Labour still had Scotland. Actually, they did very well in Scotland in 2010. But Labour got 29% and we get a hung parliament. I think it's possible that Labour could have got more or less the same vote share and we get a hung parliament because all these leave voting seats, which somehow Labour keeps, the Tories don't win, and the Tories then get a majority of 20 rather than 60 plus.
All these things are counterfactual, but you need to go. I'm quite prepared to have those discussions, but you need to go back to the root of where it started to go wrong. For me, nearly a week on, I'm almost prepared to say we lost it from April onwards. Almost nothing we did from April was going to... Once you lose a third of your votes to the Lib Dems, and then in Scotland it's to the SNP, and in some key seats like Stroud in Gloucestershire, it's to the Greens. Once you lose that essential part of your coalition that really wants progress, that really wants to fight climate change, that is anti-racist, if the anti-racists and the green climate people, the eco-warriors, are not voting Labour, that's a really poor base to go into the really tough seats where people are gripped with this nativist narrative and say, vote for us. Losing, as it were, what some disparagingly call the social liberals, losing them doesn't get you a single extra vote in Lee, in Colne Valley. So look, December, January last year, December, January 1819, we're arguing there's polling evidence that we'll lose 3 or 4 Remain voters for every one we lose. I.e., we're going to lose Leave voters to the Tories or to the Brexit Party, as it became, UKIP then, if we adopt a Remain and second referendum position, but we'll lose 3 or 4 if we don't. And I think that actually was borne out by the events we just described, what happened after the NEC rejected the position. But here's the problem, and here's where Corbyn factors into it. I underestimated how much the negative polling for Corbyn would interact with the negative polling among Leavers on Brexit. According to data praxis, 300,000 Labour Remain voters switched to the Tories, straight to the Tories, over Corbyn. So if you add them to 800,000 who we think leave Labour voters in 2017, it's a lot of people. 800,000 switched direct to the Tories this time over Brexit, but 300,000 switched over Corbyn. And
they say Corbyn, they don't say because it was a second referendum or... Because they might have just... I mean, I voted Remain, but I had reservations about a second referendum just procedurally.
It takes a... Well, look, what do they these are not... This is not qualitative research. It's an analysis of the opinion poll. But I think... If it's wrong, let's revisit the issue. But let's assume it's right. Yeah. What it means is that some people were saying, I just want this over with. Some people were saying, I just want this over with, and I don't want him to be Prime Minister because he will damage our national security. I've had that said to me on the doorstep. And a lot were saying, we want Brexit. That Boris Johnson's no put. Remember, no, they're voting for a hard Brexit. No, it's Mr. Letterbox, Mr. Hijab, Mr. the racist guy. They're voting for him. They're quite happy to vote for him because they want Brexit. I think we would have... What I said when the furore broke out, because I argued quite strongly that it was a huge mistake by Corbyn not to commit to the second referendum early. When the furore broke out, the argument that I put down, and I will stick to, is that for a section of the party, seeing us detach from the older, white, ex-manual working class in places like Lee, where I come from, their only argument was Brexit. A, it was always going to be a difficult argument to win someone over. B, that wing of the party around Jeremy is very reluctant to talk about, in fact, they call it social authoritarianism. That is crime as a working class issue. Issues like policing, issues like people's rents, issues like the insecurity of being a self-employed white van driver don't come easily to that wing of Labour. And I think they were mentally substituting Brexit for the actual conversation those people wanted to have, which is about what are you going to do about the drug dealers? What are you going to do about the antisocial behaviour?
I agree with I respect all of that, and I'd agree with it. But two things. Leave won. I think often the 52-48 cleavage was misrepresentative because Leave won in 400 seats.
Yeah.
We stacked up, or Remain stacked up, votes in Tottenham, in Manchester, and all the big metropolitan areas, university towns, and under first past the post, that's not good.
Good.
Secondly, Brexit did become, it became a, how can I put this, a vessel for democracy. And so very quickly, people were saying, well, I think we should respect the vote because I believe, we have a democratic system. I canvassed in a few sort of Labour seats, and obviously we all have our assumptions when you knock on the door and then somebody comes out, young woman, okay, this is going to probably be good. They're generally speaking more, open, receptive to Labour arguments. I'm not voting for anybody. Why? What's the point? We voted to leave and nobody's doing it. And you think, well, if she's saying that, then something's in a Labour seat and she could be a Labour maybe. You don't think there are quite a few people like that who just got turned off by the second referendum?
I do. And one of the things about English radicalism is it's always been about sovereignty. It's always about going right back to the Peasants' Revolt and the English Civil War and the whole John Wilkes Democratic Revolt in the late 18th century. It's the natural free-born rights of English men. That's what it was. Is that there's something very correctly radical about people's attachment to the rule of the people by the people. But because we live in a parliamentary system, the problem with Parliament was it couldn't express a view. It kept failing to express a view on Brexit. Now, the only way of getting around that was an election or a second referendum. That is, you need a new democratic mandate. And I was worried that trying to do it in Parliament alone, suppose we'd got a parliamentary coalition together that would have, for example, even delivered the customs union. It was 3 votes away. Yeah. The Lib Dems and the Greens, not the Lib Dems. The
Lib Dems abstained.
Yeah, and the independent group voted either against or against. The Greens. So we could have got almost a soft Brexit through, and that would have sorted it all.
It would have stopped a US trade deal, because the Americans have been on record as saying no FTA if you have a customs union.
So, so I would have certainly voted for that. I'm glad that Labour did vote for that, etc. But all the way through, you were trying using parliamentary means. But then in the end, what's the thing that through it all? Johnson gets a deal. I think one of the problems on the Remain side was a lot of people assumed Europe didn't want him to get a deal. In the end, they fell over themselves to get a deal. And we can see why. We'll see why this in the next year it opens up. Because he's signed up to, it's in there in black and white, to mirroring the European regulations. And if he now breaks that, they'll force him into a no-deal crisis, and there'll be another year of brinkmanship, at the end of which there'll probably be an economic chaos scenario. Yeah. So this is what's coming. We need to prepare ourselves for it. And I'm sad to say, because everybody wants to move on from Brexit, I accept Brexit will happen. I'm sad to say there'll be another year of this drama played out, but the reason the Europeans signed the deal is because they got everything they wanted. Ireland is, Northern Ireland is effectively half out of the UK already, and then they get Johnson to sign, I will mirror European regulations, even though it's only in this thing called the political declaration, not in the agreement. It says that he must do a deal that honours the principle of not doing a race to the bottom. Now he's going to do a race to the bottom, and legally that's a legal document. It's a treaty. They can at any point pull the plug on it and plunge our economy into quite a serious state of chassis.
So we've talked about Brexit, the EU, briefly about Jeremy Corbyn. We've had, almost a week now to look back on the election. What for you was the single biggest failure of his leadership over 4 years?
He never empowered the membership. Now, why does this matter? Because the wisdom of crowds is quite a big thing in modern society, with networked intelligence. The wisdom of crowds was telling us in the 2018 conference, shit guys, we need to move to a more pro-European position. That's where our base is. I think the wisdom of crowds would have said, losing the European elections on 14% of the vote, losing half your representation in the parliament is a bit of a disaster.
Well, the European elections.
Yeah, the European elections.
But the Tories got 9%. I mean, that's the thing. The Tories held their nerve and weren't put off by a bad result, whereas Labour was.
Yeah,
that's the counter-argument.
But the Tories knew, I think, or rather they... And let's remember this. I met one of the key people in the Brexit Party not long after it was set up, and they told me to my face, this is just leverage. We're creating a vehicle that will allow us to leverage over the Conservatives, force them towards a hard Brexit. Now, they never completed the sentence, which was, and then we'll demobilise it, but one could impute that. The Lib Dems is a different thing.
Yeah.
The Lib Dems had just got, first of all, 11 MPs from Labour to split to them. First, they'd already taken a third of our vote, according to the polling average. And what was the threat? People like Tom Watson, the threat was that they could take it the next tranche. And at this point, the Lib Dems become possibly the main opposition party. So it was a non-trivial threat at the time. But okay, let's not.
Point taken. The Brexit Party didn't have any MPs.
So what's the thing that he did? He should have empowered the party, and he should then have created a workable, far more resilient and wider coalition in opposition. That is, so the shadow cabinet never allowed to make policies, a sign-off process. If you've got an idea on housing, your housing shadow minister, send it to Jeremy. It gathers dust. Eventually, something completely different comes back, and that's it. Okay. Why is that a problem? Because serious politicians won't put up with that. And they were never invited in anyway. Some of the key figures of the centre and the centre left of the party were never invited into to it.
What?
Well, I'm thinking of Yvette Cooper. Yvette Cooper.
Is she on the centre left though?
Well, I think the right wing of the Labour Party is. A lot of the people have actually gone. The people who quit, the Ian Austin, John Mann, Roger Goldsmith, the guy who supported the anti-LGBT protests in his own constituency. These were people, these were the dinosaurs from the days of the Cold War, trained and put there by who knows who, but basically as the representatives of the Cold War Atlantic order. Yeah, that's what they were there to do. They have gone. But I see a politician like Yvette Cooper as an organic, centre-left. Centre-left is a wide category in Britain. No, of course, at times they would try and pull the plug. Hilary Benn's another one. They were always kind of, in a way, working against the Corbyn project. So the problem was, could you trust them? But I argued several times that you should try. You should really try to bring some of those people in, because what you're then doing, what does it force you to do? It forces you to run the party and the PLP through absolute centralist means. And sadly, under Corbyn's, after 2017, Jeremy and his officials started to run the party very bureaucratically. And I mean,
after 2015, you said?
No, after 2017. They won the election.
Yeah.
And they needed to have centralism. I've got no problem with having a tough party machine.
Yeah.
You have to whip people, you have to keep people in order. But the problem is, what it became was bureaucratized, and we really paid the price of this. I don't think we lost the election because of this, but if you are getting candidates imposed. You're getting people saying, we're on the doorstep, guys, in the following constituency, but we don't know who the candidate is because Jeremy's people haven't got round to deciding. And why? Because I think it's very clear that they left the selection of candidates late because they weren't winning selections. So they hadn't democratized the party so that the left could win. So the right keeps winning selections. So what their solution in the end is, don't have any. Wait till the election's called. And then a perfectly new person, we saw it in Bury South, a woman, a brilliant candidate, Lucy Burke, Bury South's a tough seat because of the anti-Semitism crisis, big Jewish community. She jumped straight in from the selection to the election. Nobody knows who she is. She's a brilliant candidate, but she's climbing a huge hill there. So I think that looking back at Corbynism, the big problem is its lack of resilience came from its brittleness and the way it tried to centralise control. I just think it was unnecessary.
But so I suppose that the argument would be that happened because of the 2016 coup. You can't trust Hilary Benn because Hilary Benn resigned the day after the 2016 referendum result to completely undermine your leadership. All these people. I agree with you. Yvette Cooper's maybe slightly different. You should probably bring in one or two, which they tried to do with Owen Smith. He became the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. This was the very person who ran against Jeremy Corbyn. They tried it, but he then, excuse my French, he shat on the leadership a second time. So what I would say the big mistake is you don't get mandatory selection because and this is going to be a problem for the next leader. We can talk about that a bit later on. It's clear to me that the Parliamentary Labour Party will not accept left leadership without party discipline being imposed through mandatory selection. They just simply will not accept it.
Yeah, and
that's I think the big mistake for me.
I think going forward, there's a whole question about whether does the left want to lead in this situation. But let's just cover off whether you call it mandatory reselection or open selection. I think it's a good thing anyway, because weirdly we'll see it in this. In the leadership election that's coming, the British public will be actually involved in the leadership election because the candidates will have to do hustings live on TV. But when you're being faced with you're going to a selection meeting and you have no idea who the people are. And I'd like open primaries. I'd like to go the kind of whole route towards where the US Democrats are going, towards an open primary system where every time you start running for the next election for the primary that you're going to have to be selected from the moment you get into office. So it creates a kind of focus on the place you come from and not Parliament. I think there was one of the side effects of Jeremy in 2017 being so effective in this kind of presidential mode of campaigning, which bombed this time, is that some MPs seem to think the job of getting them re-elected, was Jeremy's. And that whatever they did in their own towns was like going to be secondary, and we now know this is a disastrous kind of approach to take. everybody who's got a seat now, if anybody's watching in the PLP, you need to be campaigning now. Not just, you need to be justify why you are there to those people. And I also think we need to select candidates very soon for the 2024 election. I think we should select them now. Set up offices, keep the offices open. And by the way, this is not an easy thing to do. In Lee, where I campaigned, 2017, we had an office on the High Street. 2019, we have an office in an office block behind a security door. Why? Because the level of right-wing discourse and far-right tropes that are out there in that society are so high, the MP didn't want to have a public-facing office. So we have to establish ourselves within those civil societies. And there are parts of them where they're so hostile to us, it's quite difficult to actually put a Labour stall in the High Street. Parts of South Wales, not just North West England.
Andrew Fisher, who was, until very recently, Jeremy Corbyn's head of policy, wrote a piece in The Guardian saying, we didn't win, we didn't form a government, but he repeated some of the things that Jeremy Corbyn wrote for The Observer on Sunday, kind of unfortunately misrepresented by the sub-editor in the title, where he said, we won the argument but lost. He didn't really say that, but that was the title. Andrew Fisher said something similar, saying, we pushed the dial left on austerity, which is true, but that was achieved clearly by June 2017. And that was 30 months ago. So what's happened over the intervening 30 months? Because it seems to me that Labour failed to democratise. There was clearly a failure to get new left-wingers selected, both as potential parliamentary candidates and then subsequently as MPs. And generally speaking, its offer to the public went backwards. Why was that? Why, from such a position of power, did things fall apart so quickly?
Well, I think we've been dealt a bad hand by Brexit. I mean, Brexit is a... I always said, if Brexit's the worst thing that happens, I'll be quite relieved. There's lots of more bad things now about to happen. And I think that Brexit was something that was a no-win situation for the left, unless it were prepared to literally sort of collude with delivering Brexit and take the hit from the Liberal voters, or it was able to mobilise forces in society and intersect with them that would resist Brexit. In the end, it did neither. Let's be honest. Most of the Labour MPs never went on any of the anti-Brexit demos, the PV demos, and neither did they ever, even the ones who now say that we should have left, they never really said we should have left, because let's remember, two of the constituencies I've been campaigning in, Lee, where I come from, we lost it. It was a 9,000 majority. Okay, even there, I'm convinced that the workforce voted Labour. The majority of the workforce certainly voted Labour. People aged between 24 and 50 with kids, with a small car in the driveway, with a child's buggy in the driveway, struggling along, that's Labour. Ex-miners, ex-engineers, sitting in a pub all day, using language that cannot be used in the workplace, and I mean really severely right-wing inflected language, alt-right memes everywhere, civil war fantasies, fantasies of ethnic cleansing. That, they most definitely, 8,000 of them voted UKIP 10 years ago. That 8,000 went via the Brexit Party to the Conservative Party. That's what it did. Now, if you want to go down the full kind of Lexit route, what you've got to realise is that you then, even in a place like Lee, become vulnerable to the Lib Dems. And you cross 20 miles away to Bury North, which is another northern seat. And that was slightly demographically different. Bury North's got a few like start-up, villages in the Pennines like Ramsbottom that become trendy. Okay, so you've got a trendy workforce there, and you've got a slightly more upmarket in terms of its demographic. Our entire campaign in Bury North was because I was involved in it, getting people who'd quit Labour to join and campaign for the Lib Dems, to come back in the space of 6 weeks, rejoin Labour and campaign for Labour. So the North itself was a problem. So Brexit, the bad hand was dealt. I think a more resilient and a party with greater, with more of the wisdom of crowds, with greater networks out there. The only network that really matters in Labour at the moment is Unite. It's a fantastic organisation. I'm a member of Unite, actually. I saw them on the ground really deliver votes. I saw them deliver activists, probably, momentum gets talked about a lot. Unite should be talked about just as much. It's fantastically good. But it always comes at the price of centralism. That's how trade unions work. Here's the line, guys, this is what we're doing. If you cross it, you don't get any support. I mean, that's how it works. I think we should have just had a more diverse and more resilient party, and opening up the selection processes, having a democratic conference. I was in Labour in the 1980s when we had a completely Stalinist bureaucratic conference. This conference, I'm sorry to say, was just as bureaucratic as all the others. The number of manoeuvres behind the scenes to try and take motions off the table, stop people speaking, calling a card vote and then not calling a show of hands and then not counting it. These things.
But that's a bit of a conspiracy theory. There was definitely a majority of cards for that. I've looked at the footage repeatedly. I mean, I know what you mean, but
the thing is that it looks bad.
It was closer than people thought, so that's why it didn't happen. But it was passed.
It looks bad, and I've got no doubt that it was passed. But all these are techniques of bureaucratic control, and I want to be in a party where we leave behind bureaucratic control.
You're watching Novara Media. This is Tisky Sauer, joined by Paul Mason. If you find this of any value, if you feel like we're creating the kind of content which is informative, entertaining, and something of a break from the norm you get with mainstream media, why not consider supporting us? Go to support.novaramedia.com. We generally ask people to give us not a week's earnings, that would be nice, an hour's earnings. So if you're on more than the living wage, £15, £20 an hour, that'd be very much welcome as an ongoing rolling monthly subscription. If you just want to make a one-off payment, you can do that too. So go to support.novaramedia.com. Right now, we've got 2,100 people watching, but we've only got 192 likes. So people hit the thumbs up button. That needs to go up to 1,000 in the next 5 to 10 minutes. We'll take questions for Paul in about 10 minutes. I've got a few more questions here. Yeah. I guess they relate now to the next leader. You've done an article on the New Statesman, how the next Labour leader must challenge the sectarian left. That followed on from a Twitter thread and a checklist you wrote. Maybe Gary can pull up the checklist shortly. It's not hugely pressing. But some of the things you spoke about on that checklist were, let's pull this up, from the left, voted against Brexit. But some of the more interesting things were, for instance, has achieved something outside politics, has been a trade union struggle, has staked something personally to fight injustice. Well, so, I mean, I was going through and I was sort of going, okay, that person fits there. But as I went through all 21 of them, I don't think anybody fits all 21.
No, nobody fits them all. And I don't expect them all to fit them all. Let me explain where I'm coming from. I think there's too much going straight into, here's the current factions, and you can really see where the current factions are lined up and who in the PLP will vote for who. I want to talk about the 2024 general election, or the snap election Boris Johnson calls when everything's gone to shit after a no-deal Brexit, which might be a lot sooner. And there, I think that we have to start from some facts. There are some facts that are just undeniable. First of all, the Lib Dems, in this election, gained 1.5 million votes. We lost 2.5 million. That's the first fact. That's an important fact if you're a left or centre-left party. We now have a rival. The second is the Greens gained more votes than the Conservatives gained. And that has mattered to us. These Green candidates beaming with their 1,000 votes as Labour people lost by 500 is a thing that we can get angry about, but there's no use being angry about it because they knew the stakes, those voters knew the stakes, and the candidates knew the stakes. They were going to let them. No, I think they did. Molly Scott Cato in Stroud knew the stakes. We pleaded with her. Extinction Rebellion pleaded with her. It was founded in Stroud. Extinction Rebellion people said to her, why are you going to let the Tories in? They're happy to do so because they have a different view of what the future... No,
But can we just stick with the Greens for a sec? So I think 11 of the 12 Tory seats, which are the closest marginals in Labour can win, in 11 of the 12... the Green vote was bigger than the difference. Now, they're obviously not all left-wing, but let's presume that generally
someone wants to ban halal meat and all the rest of it.
Yeah, let's presume they're generally speaking more likely to vote Labour than Tory. I just feel like, given first past the post, Labour was standing in a position of a Green New Deal, and I saw people like Rupert Reed say, well, I'm never going to vote Labour because they believe in growth. And I think, look, you want to live in a world of twigs and wiping your ass with, jute cloth and, not having hot water and antibiotics. That's fine, right? But I feel like they actually haven't really got a serious interest in transforming and transitioning our economy in a way that Labour does. And so I would say, what's the point of the Green Party?
No. Well, I've got a proposal on the Green Party, and it's very simple. I think we should offer them the same position in Labour movement as the Cooperative Party. That is, that the Cooperative Party is affiliated to Labour. You can stand as a Labour and Co-op MP, and the Cooperative Party gets to move resolutions at conference, and sometimes they get through. If we said that to the Greens, and we said, look, in places like Stroud, become a Labour and Green MP, and let's especially know that they managed to defeat the excellent MP in the area, David Drew, who's now out. The next MP could stand as a Labour and Green. Look, and if they say, well, fuck you, then that tells the voters everything you need to know about them. I'm in favour of smothering with a bit of kindness, and it's not a minor issue either, because in the election that Ed Miliband lost, they got 1 million votes, right? But let me come to the point of where we're going with the argument. In 2024 or the next election, I think we have to face the fact that a Labour majority government is probably impossible because of Scotland. Scotland will now spend 5 years kind of grandstanding. Scottish nationalism will spend 5 years grandstanding. My attitude to Scottish nationalism is all nations have the right to self-determination, and if they want to secede from Britain, do it. Don't talk about it, do it. Like the Catalans, just get on with it. But what they don't want to do that. They want to stand there.
You don't think the SNP is serious about independence?
I don't think Nicola Sturgeon is. No, I think there's some really good radical independence people inside the SNP who want a progressive anti-capitalist Scotland. But no, it's great for them. They've got the ability to. They could raise tax if they wanted. They never do. They've got the independent ability to do it. They almost never do. So they don't even take advantage of the actual fiscal autonomy, relatively small fiscal autonomy they've got. But it's great for them because you spend 5 years grandstanding, you hegemonize the society. Scotland it becomes more and more detached, and good for them because they're a nationalist party. That's what they want. Becomes more and more detached. I'd be very surprised if within a generation Scotland doesn't go independent, but within the next 5 years, nationalism will become hegemonic. Right. So what does that mean? Right, we've got 80 seats to win back to even get like one person majority in Parliament. So let's face it, we need to start thinking about constitutional reform. We need to have, and I think some of the more, even Richard Leonard actually has put forward this. We need to have a maximum devolution offer to Scotland that's much more radical than what we have originally wanted, or the Labour Party. We need to have a proposal on constitutional reform, which I would say probably has to be proportional representation. If then you can construct an electoral pact with the centrists who are going to be the Lib Dems and the Greens and the Scots Nats and Plaid Cymru, guess what? The Tories will never be in power again. That's as simple as that. That's what the next election is going to be
in
about.
2015, between UKIP and the Tories, they got 49% of the vote. The Brexit Party, had they stood in every seat, and the Tories this time round could have got 45% plus.
Yeah.
That's minority government sort of status, isn't
it?
Yeah,
look, society it's like in America, society is completely split, and our job is to win the percentages that we can. Demographics are on our side because the youth are voting something like 57% for Labour. Even people under 35 are 54% Labour. So that population, Gen Y, Gen Z, millennials, as they get older, I don't think will become socially conservative in the way that their elder generations have. So long term, there is the possibility of a hegemonic progressive majority in Britain. So we've got to build it. Now, working back from that, how do we do that? I want the left to keep control of the Labour Party because there are forces who want us to go straight back to neoliberalism. And it's a neoliberalism that's got no function for modern capitalism. The neoliberalism they want is Johnson and Mogg and Gove, deregulation, nasty attacks on minorities. They don't want Blair Cameronism again. And so we need to stop that. That's the priority number one for me. And I will, if it comes down to my final, you have to put preferences, don't you? So my final preferences will be them at the bottom, the neoliberals at the bottom.
Yeah.
And so anybody else will get my vote before them. But the purpose of setting out criteria is to say, actually, I'm not so bothered about who will keep the flame of Corbynism alive. Corbynism is actually two lefts. It's quite overtly. I mean, it's not an insult for people who think the Soviet Union was a great place. It's not an insult to call them Stalinists. There's them. And then there are people completely different from that who have a horizontalist, socially liberal tradition. And if we couldn't run the party effectively when we were all together, how are we going to do it when on the key issue we've diverged? So I'm looking for a leader who can manage that party, and that's why I put these kind of personal qualities. It's going to be: can you manage a crisis? Have you done something? Did you put something on the line?
So you're not interested in a continuity Corbyn candidate then? Well, that's the default for a lot of people.
Yeah, it is, and I'd argue with them the following: I don't want continuity with the bureaucratic centralism I've seen. No, absolutely not. Where you're getting briefed against, where Squawk Box will write an article against you.
I'll get a message from Squawk Box.
Fine.
Go on, no, please. People should be honest on
he's
here.
He's over there. Where I'm not interested in. I want the continuity with the policy.
Yeah.
With some people are saying the 2017 manifesto was better. It was certainly more effective. Actually, on this one, with the Green New Deal at its heart, for me, that's what I want continuity with. Because the Green New Deal gives us permission for fiscal and monetary radicalism. We never talked about monetary radicalism because the Labour tradition is terrified of monetary radicalism. But we should have... So fiscal, that is tax and spend, borrow and spend. That's fiscal radicalism. Monetary radicalism is set the Bank of England a target that fights climate change, that fights inequality, that boosts productivity. These are all fantastic things. That's what I want to defend. I don't want to defend that part of it that was dysfunctional, which is... I mean, the Skripal case is probably the extreme example. The anti-Semitism fiasco is an extreme example. But where that comes from is a kind of politics. Stalinist politics. It was Joseph Stalin who suppressed the Russian account of the Holocaust after the Second World War. We on the left must always understand that we are not, our tradition are not heroes by right in the struggle against anti-Semitism. On the one hand, there's that problem. And on the other problem, I think it was appalling. I can say this now. I thought at the time, appalling the way Corbyn reacted to the Skripal case. Basically repeddling lines that were just talking points from the Russians. I mean, why did we do that? What advantage did we think we were going to ever get?
I guess the point with the Corbyn project and one of its strengths is, historically, and where it drew a great deal of legitimacy, was the default setting of scepticism with regards to the foreign policy establishment in this country. And that instinct kicked in, and it probably wasn't actually correct.
No,
it was with me. I even said personally, I said, look, until somebody can submit evidence where a particular, it could be Iran, it could be a bunch of places.
Absolutely.
And until you can do that, but I understand that somebody who's leading the opposition shouldn't say that.
Yeah.
I can understand
but it's not
where
just
it came
that. Diane
from.
Abbott had been on air saying it. We've seen the evidence, and it's clearly the Russians. John McDonnell then said it, and it was a look. I don't think that lost us the election, but you have to bear in mind that since every socially conservative elderly vote now matters to us, and it's very clear that that's who voted against us, that is what they care about.
Yeah.
And I said this within Corbynite circles right back to 2015. The lesson to learn from Alexis Tsipras and Syriza is the lesson that he really harshly drummed into Syriza on its march to power, which is, if you're going to take their economic power, don't take their toys away at the same time. That you can get away with one, but you will not get away with basically dismantling the bourgeois state. Not as a social democratic party with no mass movement, no Leninist ideology. If you've got it, and even look at people who have got it, like the Bolivarians, like Evo Morales. Even Evo Morales couldn't keep power with a mass movement. We got to have to do one thing, and that thing is radically dismantle neoliberalism and replace it with an economy on a trajectory beyond capitalism. That's fucking radical. So if you're going to do that, you do it in a way that reassures people about the national security, the state. Now, I know that's not popular, but that is my politics. So I want somebody who will... Now, this is my... I'm not going to get this because almost everybody on the left doesn't have the same position as me on things like Trident. But I want somebody who understands that we've got to build this coalition to win in 2024. And it means a radical keep the radicalism on economics, a radical proposal on constitutional reform, and we'll have years of defending human rights and the rule of law and the judiciary by then, because they're going to attack all this. We'll have years of defending ethnic minorities against a more and more vicious and open nativism. So that'll all be with us. And so I just want a leader who's thinking about that, not how do we keep the key 5 officials around Jeremy in jobs. That's what I really don't want.
Right. I mean, I'd agree with you. I think at Novara, we've got a particular position in regards to who becomes the next leader. We're not going to have a collective, kind of endorsement of anybody. And I think personally, I would keep my own preferences private unless somebody really came out to me, because unless you have a candidate that backs... I'm not a huge fan of pure PR. I think closed list systems like in Israel, where else has them? Basically, it centralises party power, because all of a sudden the leadership can just choose every candidate. I would like to maintain something resembling the constituency system.
Additional member.
I love the additional exactly. The German system, I think it's a very smart system. If you had a leader that said, I want AMS, I want to have a grown-up conversation about Welsh, greater autonomy for Wales, greater autonomy for Northern Ireland, Scottish independence, and a big conversation about a written English constitution, potentially even a republic. You don't say it like that. No. But these are the big questions now, which now with Brexit, with the dissolution of the union, it's come out of the box. And the left has to have an answer for these things.
Look, right now...
as well as mandatory
Right
selection.
now, as a journalist, I want to be able to have a good relationship with anybody who's standing, including Jess Phillips, who I won't ever vote for. So, I'm not going to come out right now and say who I'd vote for, but I will eventually when I see what they say about the criteria I'm laying down. But we on the left have to get used to the fact that we're going to, when it's not left-run and centralised, and I don't think it will be, we now have to make alliances and networks that are beyond our natural tribe inside the labour movement. We're all got to open up a bit. Now, you say about the radicalism, and we probably agree on what we should fight the next election on, but let me just remind you and the viewers, this is going to be 5 years of hell. The argument that we wanted Brexit and you didn't give it to us, we the people and you the shitty parliament stood in the way of Brexit, is going to be done again on what? It's going to be done again. The first thing is on attacking ethnic minorities and East European migrants. On the doorstep, I'm sorry to say, this was the number one thing of those who voted Tory. For the real hardline Tories, where they've got their support now, are people who have a nativist view. And it's the first time I've seen actual nativism. So ordinary British racism is racism. And even for saying this, if a BBC presenter was sat where you are, they say, what are you calling the viewers, you're calling the voters racist, Paul? You want elect a different electorate? No, if racism is endemic in a former imperialist society, the left has to say so, and it has to fight it. We're not going to throw our huge black and ethnic minority BAME community under a bus at all. Same as we're not going to do that to the Jewish community or the lesbian and gay community. But what's going to happen, the dynamic is, the same trick they pulled on us on Brexit will be used on racism. They'll start saying things like they are now, you're the racists. You're the racists, and we are the anti-racists. And what does our anti-racism consist of? It's 2 Qs at the GP. This is what they really want. But people I've talked to on this, some of them want to literally ethnically cleanse Britain, but some voters just want, I was born here, my dad dug the coal mines, and fought the war, so I should be in front of you at the GP. Now, unfortunately, there is one candidate, and I know she's a brilliant person, Lisa Nandy, but the logic of what she writes about those communities is quite close to that. And I just think we have to either...
She would dispute that because, she's half Indian herself, and she would say that there's not a connection between that place-based politics.
You can have nativism. You can have nativism, as we found with Trump, among, say, Hispanic voters in southern states of America. But look, I'm not saying Lisa's a nativist. I'm saying that argument will come up inside the labour movement. It can be contained in the labour movement, because I think we do have answers to that, and it's about creating a community based on citizenship. I think if we said to those voters, everybody who lives here, for any length of time, can apply for citizenship, and citizenship rights are universal from day one, they'd get that. But that then, what you'll be then accused of is communitarianism.
Well, here's the thing, I know my colleague Michael Walker and I both sort of disagree with the radical left about no borders, etc. And I'll give you a simple explanation as to why. I think this. The early days in Novara, we interviewed a Nigerian refugee. She was in Yarl's Wood. She came out, and the instinct for her was, "Why arrest me? I was working hard, paying my taxes. What had I done wrong?" And in a strange way, that's the exact same logic that many a Tory voter will say, "Well, look, they're not legitimate because they don't work, they don't pay taxes, they don't play by the rules." And you say, "Well, if they do, is that okay?" And they say, "Well, of course it is, yeah." And so there's actually not a big distance often. I mean, that's just rhetoric.
Yeah.
In reality, often many of them want 2 Qs at the GP, etc. Same with my dad. My dad was a refugee, and if I would say to my dad, should we have, global freedom of movement? He would say, well, that's obviously not going to work. But if somebody's here and they want to work hard and they pay their taxes and they obey the laws, then of course they should be here. They should have every right.
Let's bring this down to a really tough question. I think it's going to be tough for all the pro-Remain, pro-PV left wingers who are standing. Clive Lewis, Emily Thornberry, Keir Starmer, or anybody else. I think also for Rebecca Long Bailey. For anybody left, because she was pro-PV, if you remember, eventually. When we fight the next election, there will be an Australian-style points immigration system in place for 3 years, right? There will be no freedom of movement. It is gone, let alone open borders, which I think, what I say to the left is every time you mention the word open borders, another person becomes a fascist, because it's not going to happen. It will happen when we conquer the world for socialism, but not before. Like smashing the state or whatever, dissolving the state. Freedom of movement is a European Union single market thing. This will be decided in the next year. If the Europeans are tough enough, we'll end up with something very close to freedom of movement. What will happen then? What will happen is that Boris Johnson will spend the next 3 years saying, they forced this on me. These liberal Europeans, with the help of Keir Starmer and Emily Thornberry and the legal system and the judges and the liberal media and the lovies in the media, it's their fault that they haven't gone. So we are going to have to fight through that, and I'm looking for somebody with the resilience to do that. It may be that we have to fight the next election on the basis of a Labour immigration control system. Think about that. I mean, we don't know.
That's going to create all sorts of tensions within the membership. Right, so Gary wants us to wrap up. We're going to do questions for 5 minutes. Hope that's okay, Gary. Wrap up at 7 minutes past. So we're going to have super quick questions, which you're going to reply to, Paul. Is that all right?
Yep.
30-second answers. Right. I will say nothing. Should Labour have played a dirtier fight during the election? Could Corbyn have won if he'd flung more mud at the Tories and the BBC? That's from Lol Watt.
Not so much the BBC. Let's talk about the BBC on another occasion. But the Tories, yes, they were fighting a personal mano-a-mano battle, and he never rose to it. And a guy came up to me on the street and said, in Leeds, again, my hometown, he said, why doesn't he stick up for himself? If somebody attacks you, you've got to stick up for yourself because people won't respect you. Now, this is a place where, it's quite easily to end up horizontal, on a Friday night. In many of these towns, they just don't understand why somebody who's is in your face, so why not fight back? So, yeah, I think the next leader has to be prepared to mix it. And actually, all of them are quite good at mixing it.
Paul mentions the possibility of a snap election. How could that happen now Johnson has the majority he needs, from Joshua Pym?
Right. Look, number one, they could, if they want, the forces of the elite in Britain, if they want to, can smash the Labour Party, if they want to. We need to see what happens when the EHRC reports, this anti-Semitism report. That will be a very traumatic period. It could mean the entire organisation is then subject to a state sanction or a legal class action. 25 more MPs, if they don't get the right leader, could leave again. We're like an onion. We're peeling off layers of neoliberalism. That's a threat. And in that situation, if you were Johnson and you were then facing a European Union that had just basically shafted you in the negotiations, you'd had to accept a load of soft Brexit, single market rules, what you do is you go for a snap election where you say, give me 150 majority. So we have to be ready tomorrow. I mean, I'm glad there's this talk of delay has gone. There'll be a new leader by March. We fight the May elections really strongly, and the mayoral elections. And on that platform, we need to get ready for that kind of thing.
This is from Chris Bowles. Is there any value to breaking up England so that the Scots and Welsh don't always feel crowded out democratically?
That's not the reason they feel crowded out. I think the reason they feel crowded out is that Scotland's been used as a guinea pig for neoliberalism, and it's always had a separate legal system, an education system, and a culture and a governance system for 400 years. The basics of Scottish independence are already there. But I think there is an argument for greater devolution. We won't be able to achieve it, and probably until the second phase of a Labour government. But, I'm a big fan of the Seven Kingdoms, the kind of Game of Thrones stroke Anglo-Saxon.
The heptarchy.
Heptarchy. I think that's a good way to rule a British republic, is to have strong regional governments, because the region can stop the city robbing wealth and power from the towns. So a regional government would be good. But we don't have the luxury at the moment. I mean, I'm sure we should probably set up a policy commission to think about it, but it's not going to be number one.
That's the kind of hard yards that I think the left now needs to do. Now that Brexit's behind us, or it's going to be behind us, Scottish nationalism, Welsh nationalism, Irish unification. I'm not advocating that, but the left has to have a position on it.
Let me see one thing that we haven't talked about. But a firefighter once said to me, you can defeat us in a strike, but we bounce back. We just bounce. We bounce off the floor. What's impressed me about the Labour movement since being defeated last Thursday is that for many people, although they're grieving and the rest of it, then a lot of people didn't expect this. We've bounced back much better. Our morale is better, actually, than it was after, say, 1983. I was sat up all night watching 1983, expected to win then. We failed. After that, it was doom. It was minor strike, it was the Prince strike, but Labourism was a doomy place. It's not. We're going to revive... those 56% of young people, 55% of under 35s are the future. Climate change will be addressed. We will stop it. We will zero carbonize this economy. And I think many of the people your age and younger, especially the 16, 17-year-olds, know that. And that's why I'm much more hopeful now than I was at the start of what turned out to be a 30-year period of neoliberalism.
Final question from our moderator, Jay. I would have skipped this, but you've been kind enough to moderate, Jay. Why are Labour so boneheaded about electoral reform? Would Labour agree that first past the post is finished, especially if Scotland leaves the UK? I mean, that's a really important point, isn't it?
Yep.
If Scotland leaves the UK, with our present electoral system, especially because of ageing in the towns...
It's a permanent Tory majority forever. You might as well not have the election. You become a managed democracy. The reason you have managed democracies, I mean, I know we as Democrats hate them, but dictators give them because they want people to not become terrorists or suicidal because then the managed democracy allows you the semblance of democracy,
like in Russia, for instance.
That's what we're gonna have if Scotland leaves. And so constitutional reform. And I know, for example, Clive Lewis, and I think to an extent both Starmer and Thornbury are thinking about that. I mean, the answers at the other end. I mean, Lisa Nanley's thinking about towns, right? Good. I don't know what Jess Phillips is thinking about. Lots of donations from rich neoliberals, I think, is what's driving there. But yes, we've got to find a way of it resonating, because the problem is, I'll predict this, if I'm around in 5 years' time, I hope I am, but we could end up fighting an election completely on an agenda that's been predictated by the Conservatives. And if it's the other thing, my big fear is that what I just described them doing about racism is they do it to us on climate. There's lots of opposition to wind farms among UKIP voting, right-wing voting Tories, Brexit Party people. And I think that if they think it's going to work, they will stir the same thing that Scott Morrison did in Australia. They've got the same apparatus to do it. The same thing that Trump is saying. Climate change is a hoax. We need to. It's killing your economy. Let's make the next election the one that says There's a right-wing argument, isn't there? Let's adapt to it, not fight it. And I really fear that.
Gary's got put one more question there, which is surprising me. But
Gary.
This is a quick one. That's actually a really, really, really good question. Because obviously you've become increasingly synonymous with a second referendum this year.
Yeah.
Is the rejoin movement viable? And that's from Ibrahim Mohammed Ali.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I think the Labour Party has to leave behind, say, Brexit's happened twice, we've lost twice. Brexit will happen. Free movement will probably end. The new left project has to be one that's focused on the Britain that is. And so there's an argument about being ready to rejoin. I think the next generation, people who are being born now, have a perfect right to say, after 30 years of what's coming, they might want to be inside the European Union. But I don't think that it's worth fighting for, because we can't win it, and therefore the Lib Dems might become a rejoin party. And there is a lot of emotional resonance for rejoining. That FBPE, Never Corbyn crowd is big. It's probably about 1 million or 2 million people. And they are looking for somewhere to go. I just think we need to be very honest with them. I do want to go back to Lee, back to Bury South, back to Colne Valley, all those places, back to parts of Birmingham that we lost, and say, right, okay, what does it take for you to think about saving this planet on behalf of your daughters and sons? And can we help you to the conclusions you need to get to stop your minds being full of this nativist bullshit? That's our big task, and I think it should be self-evident to Novara viewers, because where you come from. This is going to be done irrespective of whether the Parliamentary Labour Party wants to do it. I think they will. We'll do this in the communities, on the streets, through struggle. And no, I think it's got to be go to the people, like the Russian Narodniks. Get out there. Let's get out there and immerse ourselves in those places. We didn't do it, to be honest. The Labour Party was a shell in a lot of the places we lost. Momentum turn up, you get handed a thing, this is how to say the name of the local place. That's not an ideal situation to start 6 weeks out from an election.
No. You've been great, Paul.
So we all, good.
This is Novara Media. We had about 2,400 people watching. If you've not hit the thumbs up, please do. It helps the algorithm. Comment as well. Hit the subscribe button. If you like what you watched, go to support.novaramedia.com.
Give money.
Yeah. We'll be doing a show on Friday. Because, of course, that's when I think we'll be leaving the European Union, almost. Yeah. The legislation will be going through. We'll be leaving in January. And then we'll be doing another show on Monday, probably talking about the stuff that was in the Queen's speech, which is tomorrow, right?
It starts tomorrow, yeah.
What is this Tory government?
Are you going to do a Christmas Day show?
Possibly, although it's unlikely.
In the morning?
I think Gary's going to take his well-earned rest. We're actually going to have a sort of Christmas break this year properly. So we'll see you on Friday. If you don't know already, we've got a party tomorrow night. That's a Brixton Jam. Maybe Gary can stick a link to that in the comments. Maybe see you there. Good night.